Hello everyone, Larry Bailey here, bringing you another weekly newsletter read-through. This information is brought to you, of course, by MBS Highway. That's where you're going to find this information yourself. I'm going to read you through everything that happened in July 8th, 2024 in review. But before we get there, a couple of things. First of all, if you're listening to this and you're not part of the Mortgage Doc community, please head over to that, join, it's free. It's where you're gonna find all of these weekly newsletters as they come out each week. It's also where you can watch the video replay, not just listen to the audio, so you can actually see what's on screen, which is really important, especially if you want to get those recipes for the weekly family hack of the week. In the meantime, if you have anything that you're doing with regards to your commissions or your intelligence in terms of your business data, head over to awesometechinc.com. That's Awesome Technologies Inc. You're going to see the eCompensate platform. It's going to help revolutionize and modernize your payroll, especially when you have folks that are part of a commission plan or a bonus plan, or if you want to actually track their expenses all in the same way in terms of technology, not having to have multiple layers of technologies to do commissions, bonuses, and expense management. Do it all in eCompensate. And then with Bullseye EZ, you can actually visualize all your data from multiple data sources all in one place. No ridiculously high-end administrator needed whatsoever, because that's why we made it easy over at awesometechinc.com. Let's get into the week of July 8th, 2024 in review. Consumer inflation cooled in June, gang, while wholesale inflation surprised to the upside. Plus, Fed Chair Jerome Powell acknowledged that elevated inflation isn't the only risk to our economy. Read on for these stories and more. First story is consumer inflation cooler than forecasted. The next story is wholesale inflation heats up. The next story is Powell testimony shows Fed focused on dual mandate. And the last story is holiday impact on unemployment claims. First story here on screen is consumer inflation cooler than forecasted. There were more encouraging news regarding the inflation as June's consumer price index, it's also known as the CPI, that fell 0.1% from May, and this marked the first monthly decline since the start of the pandemic and helped push the annual reading lower from 3.3% down to a 3% flat. While core CPI, which strips out that volatile food and energy prices, increased 0.1% for the month, and while the annual reading declined from 3.4% to 3.3%. So we see this nice graph on the screen here, and it's giving you the June from 2023 through June of 2024, and we see the CPI kind of going up and down with the headline year over year. But the core is where the money's at, and you can see that is on a steady decline, and that's what we love to see if we care about paying less for things. Bottom line in this story, gang, is remember, while the Fed hiked its benchmark Fed funds rate 11 times between March of 22 and July of 23 to a 2-decade high, and they did that to fight inflation, which, by the way, remember, that inflation peaked at 9.1% in 2022. Their goal with this series of hikes was to slow borrowing and spending so pricing pressure would shrink and inflation would come under control. The Fed has repeatedly said they do not plan to cut rates until members have gained greater confidence that annual inflation is moving sustainably towards their 2% target. Fed Jerome Powell reiterated this sentiment last Tuesday and Wednesday during his semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress, which occurred ahead of Thursday's CPI release, and we're going to talk more about his testimony below in another story. The June CPI data followed better than expected numbers in both April and May, giving the Fed another welcome sign that inflationary pressures are easing, especially after readings in the first quarter of this year were unexpectedly high. The next story is wholesale inflation heats up. So the producer price index, which is known as PPI, because you have to have an acronym for everything. This measures the inflation at the wholesale level, and that was hotter than expected in June, while May's readings were also revised higher for the PPI. The headline PPI rose 0.2% last month, with the annual readings also up from 2.4 to 2.6%. And the core PPI, which strips out the volatile food and energy price, that rose 0.4%, and the year-over-year reading increased from 2.6 to 3% flat. Bottom line here in this story is that after June's cooler consumer inflation report, wholesale inflation surprised to the upside. While the PPI report did not move the markets when it was released on Friday, the data is important because some of the components are factored into another inflation measure called, and you guys know it, we've talked about it, it's here again, the personal consumption expenditure, PCE. We need to see if this causes PCE to be hotter than expected as a result, but thus far, expectations are still for a low PCE reading when that data is released on July 26th. Here's some more of that Jerome Powell testimony. So Jerome Powell testimony shows Fed focused on dual mandate. Here's the story. While the Fed has a dual mandate of price stability and maximum employment, in recent years, they've been more focused on taming out of control inflation, given that the labor market has been strong. However, in his testimony to the Congress last week, Powell acknowledged that, quote, elevated inflation is not the only risk we face, close quote, as the job market has cooled considerably. So the bottom line with this story is what to know is Powell also noted that economic growth has moderated after strong expansion in the second half of 2023. Cooling consumer inflation combined with signs that the economy and job market is slowing have led to growing calls for the Fed to begin cutting their benchmark Fed funds rate, with growing odds that a cut may occur in their meeting on September 17th to 18th. The inflation and labor market reports released ahead of that meeting, you bet it, they will play a pivotal role in that decision, undoubtedly. Next story is holiday impact on unemployment claims, and we see this every year. So the initial jobless claims fell by 17,000 in the latest week, with 222,000 people filing for new unemployment claims. Continuing claims also fell by 4,000 as 1.852 million people still receiving benefits after their filing initial claim. Bottom line here, gang, is that while the initial jobless claims fell to their lowest level since May, the measured week included July 4th, and this could have impacted the data as people often put off filing during holiday weeks. That's not, and this is personal commentary, that's not always really the case. They might not put it off. They literally just may miss it. So when they say put it off, like, oh, I'll get to it next week, you have to, if you've never filed for unemployment, congrats. But if you have to file for unemployment, you've got to pick a day, and it's always that day in most unemployment systems at this point in the country. And so if your day happened to be Thursday, it gets messy and people get screwed up, and sometimes these things just don't happen on time when July 4th or any other major holiday falls during the week. You don't see necessarily this happen when the holiday falls on the weekend. To go on with the story here, continuing claims measured the week before Independence Day, so they were unaffected by the holiday. These claims now have topped 1.8 million for the last 5 weeks, remaining near some of the highest levels we've seen in recent years, suggesting that it's becoming harder for people to find a new job once they're let go. Again, the Fed will be watching for any sustained rise in unemployment claims as they weigh monetary policy and the timing for rate cuts this year. Again, if you're listening to us on audio only, thank you. Head over to mortgage.community to watch this entire video, and you can check out the Family Hack of the Week for the National Ice Cream Month. It's brought to you by somebody. I don't know where this recipe comes from. It's a simple no-churn recipe, and it comes from some anonymous deliverer of sweetness, goodness. If you like ice cream and you like chocolate chunks and cookie crumbs, and you don't have to churn. Here's what we're going to look for this week, gang. For more, back to our economic news. Important housing reports are ahead starting Tuesday with an update on home builder sentiment for this month. June's housing starts and building permits will also be reported on Wednesday. Also of note, June's retail sales will be released on Tuesday and the latest jobless claims on Thursday. Plus, we'll see an update from manufacturing for the New York region on Monday and the Philadelphia region on Thursday. A lot of stuff going on. And if you're paying attention to over here in this ticker in the top, we can see if we go back over into the candlesticks, right? And so we'll go down. I think this is that. Yeah, we'll go back down to 1 year because that's good. So we saw rates were at their highest. If you try to get a mortgage sometime around, if you try to lock your interest rate, I should say, sometime around the end of October 23, you may want to come back and check out with your lender. Now it's July 2024. The cost of money back then, if you look at this candlestick, was 96. Cost of money right now is just about 101. That's 5 points. And your interest rates could be actually a full 1% better, if not more than 1% better. So maybe it's something to check out. But 10-year Treasury is getting a little bit more expensive than we saw last week, while the 30-year MBS is the interest rates are rising a little bit, and that's why we see in these candlesticks, that pricing is a little bit worse today than where it closed on Friday. But you can see we had a lot of improved pricing really since July 2nd, straight through on Friday, whatever day that was, the 13th or 12th, I guess it was. So that's it. It's Larry Bailey struggling with his calendar, but always here for you. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you on next week's read through. Take care.